Your sons and your daughters are beyond your command. Your old road.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. My name is Doris, and thank you so much for joining us today. The National Day of Action Against Anti-Asian Racism. I'm your host tonight, and my pronoun is she and her. I'm joining you from the ancestral and unceded homelands of Hakamiam and Squamish-speaking peoples, as well as all Coast Salish people. I'll be joined by my co-host, Mike Brian Chang, and you'll hear from him very soon. Everyone is muted on tonight's e-rally, so we can show our appreciation and support to our speakers tonight. Feel free to use the chat and show support like this. And to mark and acknowledge our work for racial justice amongst all people, I'm inviting and thankful to have Tanya Cameron present a land acknowledgement. Tanya Cameron, she, her, is an ally of the coalition, an activist and community leader in Corona, Ontario Treaty 3 territory. Tanya.
Thank you. Bonjour. Anin, Tanya Cameron Nedishnikas, Kenora Ndunji, Nisachuan Nin Ndunjiba, Gawin Apijen Ninata Ojibwe Mose. Good evening. My name is Tanya Cameron, and I am from Kenora. My home community is Nisachuan. I don't speak Ojibwe fluently, but I'm learning. Today, I'm come to you on the Treaty 3 territory. Specifically, I'm on the traditional lands of the Dolls 38. In every First Nation is known in the Indian Act as an Indian Reserve, and all our First Nations were given a number. So my community was number 38. My community used to be really big until settlers decided to build the town of Kenora in the middle of Indian Reserve number 38. So it was broken into 38A, 38B, and 38C. So it's Nisachuan Indian Reserve number 38C. Also in the location where I built my home just outside of Kenora, it used to be a Métis community. And there is a Métis elder who lives down the road from me. And as we were clearing the land and doing the blessing on the land, she shared with me the stories of the Métis families that used to live and dwell here. So in the spirit of reconciliation, I ask that you look into the lands where you call home. There is a helpful website that can help you identify which treaty and or Métis land that you are situated. And I'm going to post a link in the chat for that. So miigwech, thank you.
Thank you, Tanya, for situating our work today in racial justice and allyship with all Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and all people working towards truth and reconciliation and racial justice and emancipation across the globe. My name is Brian Chang. I'm joining you from Takaranto, traditional lands of the Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River Valley. Today, the coalition will be enforcing an anti-harassment principles during this event. Harassment is not a joke. It creates feelings of uneasiness, humiliation, and discomfort. Often, it is an expression of perceived power and superiority by the harassers over another person or group. Mutual respect must be the basis of interaction among us today, in addition to cooperation and understanding. We will neither tolerate nor condone behaviors that are likely to undermine the dignity of an individual or a group, or create an intimidating, hostile, or offensive environment. We invite all those who participate to help us create safe and positive experiences for everyone. And we are dedicated to providing a harassment-free environment for everyone, regardless of gender, gender identity and expression, age, sexual orientation, disability, physical appearance, body size, race, ethnicity, or religion, or lack thereof. And we do not tolerate harassment of participants in any form. And we do have moderators who are watching tonight to make sure, and we will remove anybody who is harassing or discriminating against others during our event. On to you, Doris.
Thank you, Brian. Well, we all know anti-Asian racism is not a new phenomenon in Canada. But since the start of the pandemic, there has been an alarming increase of anti-Asian racism and hate crimes in Canada and across North America. Well, I'm sure you all read the Bloomberg article last week. It says Vancouver is the anti-Asian hate crimes capital of North America. Vancouver has seen a staggering increase of over 700 increase in 2020. And Toronto police reported a 51% and a number of reported anti-Asian hate crimes rising 500%. Like many of us, we were horrified by the news of the mass shooting deaths of the 8 people, including 6 Asian women in a spa in Atlanta. Stand with Asians Coalition, short form we call SWAC, SWAC, was founded on the Facebook group 3.5 weeks ago in Burnaby by a group of activists. Today, we have over 1,300 members across the country. If you don't have Facebook, we encourage you to join us. Still, we endeavor to make this group as accessible as possible. SWAC is a community of people in Canada who are concerned about the surge of anti-Asian racism in our cities. And Stand with Asian Coalition brings allies together to raise awareness and to combat anti-Asian racism. We must condemn all forms of hate in public spaces because it creates unsafe conditions for members of the Asian, Black, Indigenous, and people of color and the racialized communities. Today, we're joined by many of you from BC, Alberta, Ontario, and Nova Scotia. We also have invited speakers from BC to Ontario to speak to us about anti-Asian racism and the rise of white supremacy in Canada. First, we have Olivia Chow. Many of us know Olivia very well as the widow of the former NDP leader, Jack Layton. Olivia was born in Hong Kong and moved to Toronto with her parents when she was 13 years old. She became an activist as a young woman, fighting for the rights of refugees and immigrants. For over 20 years, she was the forefront of the ultimately successful campaign to achieve the national apology and redress for the discriminatory Chinese head tax. Olivia won her first election in 1985 and served as the Toronto Board of Education for 6 years. In 1991, Olivia became the first Asian-born woman elected as a Metro Toronto councillor. First elected to Parliament in 2006, Olivia won re-election twice. In Parliament, her early learning and childcare bill laid the legislative foundation for a universal, high-quality, affordable, and non-profit national childcare program. Join me and welcome Olivia Chow.
Hi, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. I ran to be the mayor of the city of Toronto, and this is 2014, in the middle of an all candidates meeting, this guy shouted out, "Go back to China!" very loudly, 200 or 300 people there. And he wasn't the only one. There was this guy with a racist sign. I don't even remember the words on it. Trust me, it's racist. And he stalked me at every all candidates meeting. He would have this giant sign right in front of the door as I was walking through, the camera showing and walking past him, and he's always there. And to top it off, the day before election day, this cartoon appeared on a very popular newspaper. Some of you that live in the city of Toronto will know about the Toronto Sun. So allow me to share with you this fabulously artistic and creative cartoon. This is now, remember, the day before election. Okay, that's supposed to be me. Who do you see there? This woman with a Mao suit. Okay, and I'm unstable. I'm shaky on a skateboard. I'm not trustworthy because I'm wearing a Chinese communist suit. I'm disloyal, a foreigner with slanted eyes, and I have no ideas, no identity, just riding on the coattail of that husband of mine, Jack Layton. To top it off, I look mean, negative. Oh my God, how could you vote for a person like that tomorrow as a mayor of Toronto? Whew. Okay, it perpetuates the this anti-Asian stereotype. And after 2 decades of public service, my loyalty to Canada is still in question. Now, I came to Canada when, 1970, I was elected since 1985. I have 3 decades of public services, been a member of parliament, city council, but that didn't matter. Yes, I called it out. It was racist, it was sexist, but a lot of people didn't. A lot of people didn't. And the interesting thing is this: BIPOC folk didn't vote for me. They voted for Doug Ford. If you think about how many BIPOC folk are there in Toronto, there's a good percentage, okay? They voted for John Tory. These 2 candidates supported police carding of brown and black folks, right? And I have, those of you that know my history, I've been demanding police accountability for decades. Didn't matter. My message did not penetrate. Now, some of you would say, hey, Olivia, you know what? It's not surprising. You have a history in Canada of fairly racist. And so again, this is Chinese being brought here to Canada as cheap labor, and then we want to get rid of them after they built a CPR. And after Canada is united, and yeah, let them pay, let's deport them. This is the Chinese head tax. And then it got worse between 1923, 47. You folks don't need me to tell you. People weren't allowed to come to Canada. And there were many other systemic racism since. So it wasn't that surprising, but I want to talk about it because there are lessons we can learn together from that incident. Here's what I learned. Calling individual out is not enough because it's not just the person. In fact, if it's just always calling out the person, we miss challenging the power behind the institution that trap people and alienate them. Me calling out Andy Donato, who is the cartoonist, is not enough. Calling out racists is not enough. It's a small little step. And then we need to think through who are on the receiving end of that racist acts. Working class, females, probably shorter, smaller in size. They easily bullied because they don't have much power. And there's always that intersection between race and class. And it's much harder to go after the system that traps people in a cycle of poverty. But let me tell you, the ultimate act of racism is allowing COVID to make people sick, to infect the families. Because, it is true, at least here in Ontario, they are the Asians, they are the frontline workers. For a government to cause and allow the environment that brought them to be sick, infect the families, and sometimes death. That is a racist action. We need to call it that way. And any action plan against anti-racism, anti-Asian racism must include better working conditions, better sick pay, of course, better protection against the virus. And that has to be part of it, from the personal to the political. And the second lesson is my last point, is that we need to go beyond talking to the political class, because we are really good at talking to the 10%. And anti-racist organizers are sometimes, we're thin on the ground. We preach to the converted. We have to build our base. It's not surprising that I did not get a lot of the BIPOC people voting for me, even though I have 3 decades of public service in Toronto. It's because I did not, and go beyond just talking to the political class. And, the right, the status quo people, it's very good at doing superficial stuff. Lots of tokenism. Very, very good at appropriating symbols and then maintaining the status quo. So we have to move beyond the intellectual discussions, move beyond just talking about it, and build relationship with those who need to hear our voices, their voices most. And those are frontline workers, they are grocery store workers, dim sum cart workers, they are factory workers, and we have to reach out to them. And any action plan must include them and have them, giving them the power to be able to advocate for themselves. And that's in fact what I've been doing in the last 4 years, teaching those that need to speak out. And that's the only way, through local organizing, to reach out, to connect, to create a politics of belonging, to bring those that are alienated because they are not making ends meet, to listen to the anger, to reach out, tell their stories, our stories, find a common ground, and to change the political policies that cause this alienation. So I'm starting off this discussion, this debate, or this conversation tonight by saying class and race. Let it intersect. Harder to see class, but let me tell you, that is racism embedded because of class also. So find me at changeleaders.ca. Join me in this journey. Let's connect with each other and let's out-organize those white supremacists. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you deeply, Olivia, for your activism, both in the past and now. So many people like myself have looked up to the work that you've done and have felt inspired to stand up for racial justice because of that work. And we all know, sadly, that racial harassment and violence is increasing in our communities. Doris mentioned the Bloomberg report earlier in her introduction, in which Vancouver has now been indicated as the #1 hate crime capital in North America. And those are some scary truths that we need to come to terms with. But we also know that behind these statistics are our friends, our families, those we love, and ourselves. And we have to make sure that we we have to keep reporting. We have to call out when it is safe to do. This is data that we need in order to confront this as a society, because because far too often people are turning away from this and they're just saying it's not a problem, or there's other problems that are more important than anti-Asian hate right now. So we have to make sure that we're doing that work. And to remind us of the real danger, we have Gina Chong joining us. Gina is a Korean Canadian resident of Coquitlam. And Gina was born and raised in Port Moody, British Columbia, where she resides with her husband and 2 young daughters. She operates an award-winning photography and videography business called Butter Studios. And Gina is also a licensed real estate agent with Sutton Group First West. She graduated from Simon Fraser University with a BA in arts with a focus on urban planning and community economic development. And Gina also has a certificate in photography and tourism marketing management from the British Columbia Institute of Technology. She's passionate about art, photography, real estate, travel, and health. And she also cares deeply about her community and wants her daughters to grow up in a safe space without fear of racism. I want that too for you, Gina. I want that for them. She's determined to speak out about this, and she has recorded a video for us tonight. So let's have a watch.
I would like to thank Doris Ma and the Stand With Asians Coalition for the opportunity to share my story on this special day. On a warm evening in mid-April, my friend Tiffany and I went for a walk at Lafarge Park in Coquitlam. We were stopped by a lady who asked us to take a photo of her using her phone. We said, sorry, we can't due to COVID. And as we walked past her, she went on a racist rant saying, you know this COVID is all because of you. You need to go back to China. It came from your country. We both stopped in our tracks, turned around and confronted her, asking to repeat what she had just said. I was dumbfounded that anyone would have the audacity to speak those hateful words in such a crowded space. We managed to obtain some footage of her saying, it came from your country, and a couple of other explicit words that I can't repeat. As awful as the situation was for us, there was one bystander that spoke up and defended us by saying, Don't be a racist. We all bleed the same. It was unfortunate that this unprovoked verbal attack on us happened in my own community. This is the community where I was born and raised, where my senior parents live, and also where my 2 little girls are being raised. I was hesitant to release the footage for fear of backlash, being overly sensitive, maybe petty for speaking out about something so minor. But after a conversation with Tiffany, we both agreed that it needed to be shared, and that night we posted it on our Facebook pages. Soon enough, friends commented, some sent private messages, and many even shared the post. By morning, I had text messages from local media wanting to do a story for the 6 o'clock news. It was an overwhelming few days with media interviews for TV and radio, and eventually the video went viral. I got calls from media in New York and friends from California messaging me to say that the coverage was on their news feeds. Only then did I know the gravity of the content I had posted. I never really did pay attention to the increase in Asian hate crimes in North America since the start of the pandemic last year, and soon I realized that this was a much bigger issue than I could ever imagine. I now know that there is power in the stories and we shouldn't suffer in silence. I know a lot of us Asians growing up in the West were brought up to stay silent, not to speak out, and don't stir the pot, and this has to change. Whether it's verbal abuse, workplace discrimination, vandalism, being coughed or spat on, or physical assault, we need to speak up and speak out, support one another, and show our strength. My hope is that seniors are no longer fearful of going out for a walk or getting their groceries, or that their adult children don't have to worry about them on a daily basis. I hope the younger generation of Asians are more vocal and speak up when they see an injustice. I hope that we all educate ourselves about the larger historical patterns of racism. I hope that allies will reach out to the Asian community and support us in this fight to dismantle the roots of racism in Canada. I hope people will open their pockets to support the elderly and raise funds for those who are injured due to a violent attack. And I hope that we could all be like that bystander in my situation that defended us and called out the racism. Let's make progress and shine a light on this issue of anti-Asian hate. I want to end by sharing a passion project of mine. You will see the faces of people in my own community. Some have experienced words of hate, and others want to share their hope for the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gina. And thank you so much for sharing such a moving clip with us. These are the faces that we see on the video, and I think it speaks to the fact that the people that we see on the news, seniors who are being harassed, and these could have been our parents, could have been our grandparents. And you're right, exactly, that we need to speak up. We have to. I wanted to thank you so much for your courage to speak up and share your story with us. Well, Gina's story reminder for us, there is an emotional and mental and physical cost to anti-Asian racism, and we must stand against it. Our next speaker is an ally from the South Asian community, and we're making this shared experience that different groups of racialized people are feeling just as a result of the pandemic and ongoing battles for racial justice. Davinder Suran is a registered nurse with 23 years of experience in the Lower Mainland of BC, and she sits on the board of trustees with the Surrey Public Library. She's the founder of One Voice Canada Foundation, which helps support, create awareness, and advocates for international students. She's a director with few nonprofit organizations and devotes her time to volunteer in the community, currently assisting with farmers' protests and working around COVID. Welcome, Davinder Suran.
Thank you, Doris, and thank you everyone for having me here today and to speak on this much needed topic. It's been a concern, racism has been around for years, as we've all discussed. This is not new. When our ancestors had migrated here, racism, started from back then. Some were turned away. We all know the battles they fought in order to path and carve the way for the rest of us here. Throughout the years, growing up in Surrey, I, as a child, faced racism. Again, I not having as many South Asians here at the time, we all kind of vouched for each other. We stood by each other's side and had to face and get through that. It wasn't until my high school years that we finally had more migration happening here, to the point where South Asians, we're seeing more South Asians, Asians, we're seeing more Asians, the Black, we're seeing more Black here. And the racism tended to almost appear as though it's disappearing, but instead of disappearing, we saw school fights happening. We started to see that there was other forms of racism taking place. We saw that these battles then went on to streets, and the white against those of color. We noticed that in the 90s, the drug gang violence had started as well. And that is due to many, many factors, but part of that has to do with bullying and racism. People not being accepted in the color that they are, people not being accepted into the country where they are growing up. And also, as we carry on, once migration started to flourish more, it all of a sudden racism noticeably was again subtle. People thought, racism is starting to die down. But what we didn't realize, it's becoming more systemic. It's in the system. And we are realizing that anytime there's a rise of racism in the US or our neighboring country, we see a rise here as well. And so basically there was a University of Toronto report done, a research report done in March of this year. And what they found is definitely over the pandemic, they have seen at least 11% rise in their region there, where they studied and did a survey on 700 people over the year that the pandemic had lasted so far. And they did find that 11% of increase in the Asian crime is happening. 11% domestic violence is increasing. There is a rise in every sort of angle that we look at. It's not just on the streets. It's not just with our seniors. It's not just within the industry of healthcare that we're working. As the other speakers have mentioned here, we have to take a look at every single aspect of where racism is occurring right now. And when I talk about registered nursing and when I talk about my own experience through the healthcare, just in COVID alone, we noticed, people, as some of the speakers have mentioned, that we hear these verbs and verbal language being used against others in such a in a discriminatory fashion that is not okay. And I think what tends to happen is some people fall immune to this, and they don't realize that just by stepping in or saying a few kind words yourself, or actually standing up against the oppression and racism that happens, that you are making a change for the better for this individual, for a positive change in the right direction. What tends to happen is some people turn a blind eye, and they start to realize or think that it's amongst the two individuals that are having their conflict going on, but they don't realize that a third person can actually make a difference, just as Doris has made a difference here. One individual can make a huge difference and impact across the nation. And that's exactly what's happened with the farmers' protest. If we look at other sort of movements that are happening in similar ways, it's all started by one or two individuals. It is a thing that we need to discuss, and not only discuss, we need to make action and move on it. Conversations are a place to start, but conversations is not where it needs to stop. When we talk about anti-Asian racism, we're also discussing racism against other people of color, because when it's happening against one, it's also happening against others. We may not hear about it, we may not see it, but that rise is happening. And I'll give you an example of just even volunteer work through the COVID. As rise in racism was happening against Asians, the South Asian community had stepped up just to volunteer and deliver groceries for those that were financially having difficulty in the times that the lockdowns were occurring. And just with that, we were being told that you are making this pandemic worse. You are increasing the pandemic despite us following all the protocols, social distance, masking, hand sanitizing. So what we decided to do is, instead of backlash, or instead of get up and have a conflict on this issue, what we started to do is post our videos and post our photos of us leaving the groceries at the doorstep, to bring out a prime example that we're not going against the protocols, we're following everything. And that helped to calm down the situation. People then they got the idea that we are not in the community to increase pandemic. We are there to assist in the right ways with following the protocols. And we are very educated people. And I think what makes a difference when it comes to racism is to show others that the awareness and education is there. This is, when you are name calling somebody, or you are talking to somebody in a manner that is putting them down and bullying them or pushing them, as we've seen in the Vancouver area with some of the seniors, that you are not putting down an individual who is not aware of the situation. And I think that alone stands up when you make an individual aware that you have that knowledge. Knowledge is powerful. And just even with this, I want to thank Doris. What she's brought about is a huge impact, which can even fall into our school systems. Having these conversations. May is Sikh Heritage Month, and we have addressed this across many different platforms. Again, with the National Day against anti-Asian racism, we need to bring it into the schools, have these discussions at young ages, because what happens is some people believe that racism isn't taught. What I believe is that babies are not born racist, but what ends up happening is, over time, they see what is going on around them. Environments make a huge difference. Education makes a huge difference. If we are teaching our kids that it is not okay at a young age to be doing certain things, they will not grow up to be doing those. So what I feel is education and awareness is very powerful when it comes to racism, and we all know that, and we are all aware of that. But I think what needs to happen is, now that the conversations have started, these need to reach our platforms at all levels. Whether it's in schools, whether it's on the political arena, whether it's in healthcare, whether it's anywhere that there is a need for it. And I think by bringing in those conversations, we start to eliminate and subside that situation and help stand with those that need it. I was reading into a group recently. They call themselves the Chinese Block Watch, and they are in Vancouver. And through the pandemic, what had happened was there were seniors that were being pushed around. This is in Vancouver, and so exactly where we're seeing the rise in the Asian racism. And so they, instead of just putting up with it or not doing something about it, action is always required. And what they chose to do was get a group together, and they walk around in a big pack, and they tell the others who are stating anything or pushing seniors that it's not okay to do that, and we will not tolerate this, we will not allow you to do this. And they made a huge impact in the Vancouver area, that they've been able to eliminate that pushing over that injustice that was happening with the seniors there due to that racism. And so I think stories like that really need to be on platforms, really need to be out there, and really need to show people that if you stand together and united on certain issues, you can make a huge difference across the globe, across the world, and across this nation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dupinder. I think it's the solidarity amongst Black, Brown, Indigenous, and racialized people is so important. And part of what you were talking about made me really think about who is allowed to or privileged enough to be seen as giving charity. And especially during a time of pandemic, we're dealing right now a lot with communities that are vulnerable, that need assistance. And some communities are being attacked for helping those. And that's absolutely unacceptable. So next up, we have Matthew Green. He is a fierce and determined leader for racial justice in the House of Commons, both in and outside of the House of Commons. In 2019, Matthew Green was elected the Member of Parliament for Hamilton Centre. He previously made history when he became the first person of color elected to Hamilton City Council in 2014. And during his time there as the Ward 3 councillor, Matthew's policy initiatives focused on ecological, equity, and economic justice. Welcome, Matt Green.
Thank you so much for having me here. I just want to state, and if I just be vulnerable for a moment, just how heavy my heart is in this moment, hearing from members of the Asian Canadian community from across the country. I want to begin by acknowledging that I'm here from the unceded Algonquin territories. I'm also the very proud Member of Parliament representing Hamilton Centre, which is the traditional territories of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe, governed by the Dish of One Spoon. I want to start there because in my reflections, I want to talk about how settler colonialism, the dispossession of land, and the exploitation of labor, and the white supremacy, and to just name the white supremacy when we talk about racism and racist systems and what that actually means from a place of real solidarity across all of our communities. I want to just share, from my heart, how grateful I am to Doris and to Brian and my big sister, Jenny Kwan, who's on the call, Olivia, and all the other ones who are holding these public spaces to bring community together that allows for us to build the kind of fundamental relationships that are necessary when we undertake in dismantling white supremacy. So critically important. I want to name the trauma that is seeing your people brutalized in social media, in the news, that the statistics do not bear witness to the pain that is being caused by the constant societal scapegoating of specifically Chinese communities, but more broadly based on the absolute ignorance of white supremacy applied more broadly to all Asians living in Canada. And I just want to share with you that in my heavy heart, that I know and feel the pain that you are suffering from. And I want to name that trauma that is the exposure to ongoing white supremacy in this moment of COVID. Now, the reason why I took the call to join this group in solidarity is because I also believe it to be true that systems of white supremacy, systems of settler colonialism are by design, systems of modern liberalism are designed to isolate us, to make this about individual experiences, and to take away our collective response, which is why coalitions in this moment are so incredibly important. To know that your struggle is my struggle, to know that together we can and we must continue the fight to dismantle white supremacy. And I want to just say that it's been my observation that I have watched as the Asian community in Canada has been made to suffer in silence for generations. We heard it in an earlier speaker, and that I hope, given the leadership that we have and the people who are tuned into this call, that we can take this as a national starting point for lifting up voices and sharing these platforms to build that coalition across all of our communities to ensure that if we're seeing lateral violence coming from other BIPOC communities towards the Asian community, that we have to be there for one another, and vice versa. that when we talk about anti-Asian hate, we are talking about white supremacy, and it is present in all of its vicious and pernicious forms. And so with that, coming in with a heavy heart, my heart is warmed, and it is lifted up by the people who are taking time tonight to recognize this, to know that if there are 100 people on this call, that if each of us are committed to calling people into action on the next call, just in the way that Olivia teaches in her course, and Brian, the work that you do in yours, that we can continue building this coalition to ensure that the path to dismantling anti-Asian hate is the same path to dismantling white supremacy and settler colonialism and the exploitation of labor in this moment of COVID. So with that, I just want to tell everybody on this call, I love you. I absolutely love each and every one of you. And just know that when you're going through this trauma, that there are other people here alongside you who will continue to walk this path with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Matthew. I cannot speak for everybody here on this call, but it's very important to hear from you telling us that, one person's struggle is our struggle, and there is a collective response there, and there's a sense of solidarity. Thank you so much, Matthew. Many of you know that this group, the coalition, has been working over time in the past 3 weeks to get proclamations from municipalities. Why is this so significant? And I think because this coalition is trying to unite municipalities across the country to declare this day as a very symbolic day that we need to set aside to address the anti-Asian racism in this country. So over 1,000 emails were sent out. We had about 100 emails replies back from different cities. And among the 100 of them, 30 of them said yes. It has been a very grueling journey in the past 3 weeks because there's a lot of back and forth between us and different city councillors and the council. I just want to say a big shout out to our councillor allies across the country who helped along this process. Many of you are in this call today. I just want a big shout out, kudos to all of you. Next year, we endeavor to start this process earlier, not 3 weeks ahead of time. A lot of cities been telling me it takes about 6 to 8 weeks to get a proclamation going. So we need each one of you. I know there are many of you from Vancouver all the way to Nova Scotia. If you represent any city that you're from, next year, we're gonna tap on you to help us to call your city hall, to call your mayor's office and say, we need to have this proclamation going. We'd love to have you to join our Facebook group. And I just hope that maybe one of the tech person can put our Facebook group link on our chat line there so that you can check it out and join us. So we have a video to show that the summary of all the municipalities and all the unions have been coming on board to join us. So let's watch. Yes, the work continues. Thank you so much. If you did not see the city, the name of your city were up there, that means next year we need you to help us to push your city to get this proclamation going. So we'll come to you for sure next year. So next, we would like to take a group picture of everybody. Now, I know a lot of you have printed out this sign, which is the E-Rally sign. And if you have one, if you can go try to print it and print it, or if not, you can actually put it on your phone and show it on your phone. Well, I'm not going to try to do that because it's going to take a little while. So while we do that, while we're all getting our E-Rally signs ready, I just wanted to do a big shout out of these amazing, amazing people who have been together with me and in this coalition and help this whole coalition and this event going. I want to thank Aldi Yan in Burnaby, Susan Ong in Ottawa, Brian Chang in Toronto, Johnny Sopotik in Vancouver, Tegan Elliott in London, Hajo de Soka in Edmonton, Yuxam Wan in Burnaby, and Charlene Penyo, Antara Paul in Burnaby, Alfred Roman in Burnaby, Jaden Dalla Toria in Richmond, Jalen Bertra in New Westminster, Tiffany Liang in Vancouver, Ryan Hurley in Ottawa, Tim Ellis in Toronto. Can we all do this to thank each one of them for the amazing work? So Tim, I hope we are ready to take a good picture. Now, we all have a sign with us. Can we all show that? Oh, maybe before we take a picture, I just want to make sure everybody know that we will be using the pictures on social media. So if you don't want to take a picture, it's time for you to turn the camera off just temporarily. And then when we're done, you can turn it back on again. So we all ready? And if you don't have the sign, you don't have a phone, how about a thumbs up? Okay, perfect. All right. Now, let's see if Tim is ready.
I'm taking photos now. Keep them going.
Thank you. I think we're done. Okay. All right, back to you, Brian.
So now, next up, we have Jenny Kwan, who for 20 years has fought for the people of East Vancouver. In 2015, she was elected as a member of parliament for Vancouver East. Born in Hong Kong, Jenny immigrated to Canada at age 9. In 1996, she was elected MLA for Vancouver Mount Pleasant, becoming one of the first Chinese Canadians to sit in the Legislative Assembly of British Columbia. Jenny was also the first Chinese Canadian appointed to cabinet anywhere in the country and served as Minister of Municipal Affairs, Minister of Women's Equality, and Minister of Community Development, Cooperatives, and Volunteers. Her tireless efforts were recognized once again in 2015 when Vancouver East residents voted overwhelmingly to send her to Ottawa to continue the fight for Canada where no one is left behind. Welcome, Jenny.
Well, thank you so much, Brian. It's so wonderful to see everyone. And it just really warms my heart to see all of you together today. Let me first acknowledge the unceded coastal territories to which I'm zooming in from, the Musqueams, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh peoples. And a giant thank you to the organizers. Woohoo! You guys are amazing for doing this work, bringing us all together, unifying a voice, and to send a clear message from coast to coast to coast to coast. And, you know, May is Asian Heritage Month. And this is the second Asian Heritage Month to take place amidst COVID-19 pandemic and rising anti-Asian hate. To the Asian community, let this be a month to strengthen our connection to our heritage, our history, and our community, and to find the strength, the resilience, and the love that we need to fight against racism and hate. We are not alone, as we can see today from all the speakers, from all the cities and the municipalities and the unions and the allies who are sending messages of support, and to say we're not alone, because we are in this together and we are uniting with one heart, one mind to fight against hate. So let us hold each other in solidarity and care as our communities grieve the ongoing pandemic tragedies, and especially our South Asian community with the devastating crisis in India that's going on right now as well. Inclusion and justice, to me, means that all entities require for dignified living, such as income, healthcare, and housing, that needs to be accessible and affordable. We need to ensure that essential workers on the front lines, include migrant workers and undocumented workers, are recognized and protected. Make no mistake, hate and discrimination is rooted in a class structure. As indicated by Olivia Chow, I couldn't agree with you more when you stated that. Think about it. Think about our history. The goal of systemic racism is aimed at keeping people down. That's what it has always been. What is the purpose of laws that says you can't be in various professions, as an example? What is the purpose of a law that says that you can't own property? What is the purpose of slavery? It's all about denigrating you. It's all about putting you down, keeping you in your place. And that is the root cause of racism in so much of it, to say that you don't belong, you are somehow lesser, right? This is what I've experienced whenever I've seen racism. I've been elected since 1993. And even before I got elected, when I was at school, we've all experienced it, and we write it off to say children are children, kids are kids, right? How many times have we all been called names? I will say it, right? Slanted eyes, chink, right? I've been called that all my life, ever since I got into Canadian soil. And then when I got elected, as a city councillor in 1993, the amount of hate mail that I got right from the get-go, right from the beginning, right, telling me that I don't belong, that my voice doesn't count. And it's all about trying to stop you from having legitimacy, having a place in society, and to be treated and be valued in the same way. We've seen that since the beginning of the pandemic, there's been public actions and calls against anti-Asian violence and racism, mass public protest movements against police violence, and to say that Black Lives Matter rallies to call for justice for migrant workers and undocumented workers, and people gathering the streets to protest resource extraction and development taking place on unceded Indigenous land without free, prior, informed consent, and calling for true reconciliation that dismantles colonial institutions and laws. This is a movement. This movement is happening. It's all happening all across our communities in different segments. Part of our challenge is to bring all that voices together and to unify that voice. Because when we see racism against any other person, discrimination against any other race, what we have to do is to see ourselves, because that is the truth of it. That is exactly what's going on, that there's a mirror of ourselves that is being discriminated against. And transformative changes are needed in our laws, in government and institutions, and for us to reconcile and to make reparation for Canada's colonial history, to root out systemic discrimination, and to eliminate the root causes of poverty and inequality. Equality of rights is supposed to be the core of Canadian law as enshrined in our charter. And yet this is not the reality for far too many people. People do not have equal access to housing, that there is no national rights base to housing. There is no national urban Indigenous housing plan that is for Indigenous by Indigenous, as an example. Law enforcement disproportionately affect Black and Indigenous peoples. People living with addictions cannot access the healthcare that they need and instead are often criminalized. People do not enjoy equitable access to early intervention, mental health, and addiction supports. The chronic underfunding and defunding of these services is a sample of systemic racism that exists within government. And Canada must make bold action to tackle systemic racism and recognize that racial disparities in education and learning, in employment, and food and water security, in health, in child welfare, in housing and homelessness, in income and social assistance, in immigration and newcomer settlement, in justice and policing and poverty are persistent and real. And we have to call out all of it and demand action for all of it. And to improve safety for members of our community, we must invest in people. And Canada can afford to have a guaranteed livable income so that everyone has access to income and food security and safe housing and safe transportation. The Atlanta incident is a reminder of the intersections and the deadly effects of not only racism, but also misogyny. And we must address policy issues that increase people's vulnerabilities to violence, including sex work, and fighting against the stigma against sex workers. While we're often tempted to think that racism is a problem confined in the United States, and the truth is racism, verbal, physical attacks for Asian Canadians are on a sharp rise, as you've all noted. And yes, according to Bloomberg, Vancouver is the Asian hate capital of North America. I never thought in 100 million years, that's what we're going to be called in Vancouver. I live in Vancouver. I'm proud to be a Vancouverite. And yet, this is what we're now known for. I mean, Jesus, think about that and what that means. Doris mentioned that in Vancouver, anti-Asian hate crimes went up 717%. Just imagine that. Every single attack is aimed at stripping us of our sense of safety and dignity. Is a clear message to say that we are not wanted and that we don't belong. I remember actually a few years ago, this is pre-COVID, I was at an international celebration, the day to eliminate racial discrimination. And at that rally, white supremacists showed up and threw smoke bombs at us to try to disperse the crowd, to disrupt us. And just as I was getting up to speak, it became particularly violent at that moment. The organizers asked me, what did I want to do? Did we want to cancel the event? And I said, absolutely not. We will not cancel the event because you know what? I will not step aside and I am going to take my place and you're going to be in my face. I am going to be right back at you. And I will not be scared away. I will not be pushed away and I will not be silenced. And so we formed a human chain in a circle around each other and stood our ground and said our piece and demanded equality, demanded justice, and stared right back at them. And to say, no, you don't. You don't get to own this space. We belong and we're gonna take our place. And this is what we must do. And we must work with our NGOs on the ground in the community. They are everywhere. Allies are everywhere, as we see from this call today. And we need to stop talking amongst ourselves and then to reach beyond and to say that the government needs to step up. We need to allow and support the NGOs that are out there doing this great work, but not off the side of their desks. They need to be funded regularly and with stable funding and with core funding to do this work. And yes, we need a public education campaign. We need support services for victims. We need all of this work to be done and to be supported by government without question. Because if we don't allow for that to happen, then we're always just going to be on the fringe fighting this. And we deserve better. We deserve better. Canada does not get to call itself a multicultural country if we don't take this seriously and invest in the people. And it is about uniting all of us together to fight this fight. And the government needs to be at the center of it, to lead the fight, to show that leadership, not just in words, but in action. And where action matters in the nonprofit world, and that's where I came from before I entered into politics, it is about funding. It is about supporting their effort and making sure that their effort can carry on. And it should never be just on the side of their desks. So I have to say, I am so glad that we're gathered here today to really kickstart this campaign. And it is a campaign. It's a campaign to unify the voices, to challenge the white supremacists, and to say and push them back, because they do not get to own this space. And I will keep saying this. They do not get to scare us, and they do not get to be that voice. And when we gather and when we unify like this, and whenever we see racism and discrimination and hate, and remember this and know this, that it is a mirror of who we all are. And when we see that, we will fight back, and we will take back our space, and we will own that stage. I say this in every Canada Day. I am so proud to be Canadian. Why? Because I see the faces of the world here in Canada. And that means real legitimacy. Every one of us. True equality, economic, environmental, and social justice for every single one of us. So I am here to say thank you, Olivia, for leading this fight, doing your education and the work that you're doing, and to Gina and to all the people who spoke, to all the labor allies, to all the friends, to Matthew, my younger brother, who is fighting this fight and who's formidable in the House of Commons, to Peter Julian, who's going to be coming on later, to every single person who may not have an elected position. You matter, your voice matter. And thank you for speaking up. Thank you for being there. Thank you for being the conscience of our community and the conscience of government. Together, one heart, one mind, we will drive out hate and racism, and let us stop Asian hate, and let us stop white supremacy.
Thank you so much, Jenny. And you said it right. If we put together one heart and one mind, we can fight this together. Thank you so much for all the speakers. We have a sports session that I want to mention to you. So in Ontario, in the legislature, we had Terence Connigan, who had tabled a private member's bill today, and talking about exactly what we're talking about this today. And I also want to mention about, Jenny mentioned about Peter Julian, but I wanted to just maybe invite MPP Terence Connigan to talk about his private member's bill first.
Thank you very much, Doris, and thank you everyone for joining us here for this incredibly important conversation tonight. I'm calling in from Toronto, which is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Chippewa, the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Wendat peoples. First and foremost, hate is not an opinion. No one should be made to suffer because of who they are. We owe it to one another to stand united against hate. White supremacy, when it rears its ugly head, it should inspire a knee-jerk, an automatic response. For politicians, their reaction should be even quicker and even more decisive. As a member of the Ontario legislature, I was proud to stand beside Butila Karpoche today as she tabled a bill to declare May 10th a provincial day of remembrance and action against anti-Asian racism. Butila is the NDP MPP for Parkdale High Park and the first Tibetan Canadian elected to public office in North America. Jessica Bell, the MPP for University of Rosedale, Chris Glover, the MPP for Spadina Fort York, and I were honored, incredibly honored, to co-sign this important piece of legislation with Butila. After tabling it, Butila also sought unanimous consent to immediately pass it into law. Unfortunately, the Conservatives blocked us, but we're not going to give up. We won't stop fighting until this legislation is passed and this province takes a stand against anti-Asian racism. Along with our leader, Andrea Horvath, the Ontario NDP is fighting for a province-wide anti-racism strategy that specifically addresses the rise in anti-Asian hate. A fully funded, independent, and empowered anti-racism secretariat. We have to ensure that race-based data is collected by every single ministry. We must have a COVID-19 equity plan that ensures that the hardest hit communities, including Asian communities, elders, women, small businesses, and essential workers get the respect and the direct financial support they deserve to recover from this pandemic. So as I finish my remarks, I'll put a link in the chat for you to make sure that your voice can be heard and that we can call upon the Ontario government to pass this incredibly important legislation. I just wanted to give a quick shout out to Tegan Elliott, who organized an incredibly powerful, emotionally raw rally in London. You know, there were numerous obstacles placed in her way and hurdles placed in her path, and it was phenomenal what she was able to put together. I also just want to thank all the speakers. Olivia, you are phenomenal. Gina, Doris, Dupinder, Matthew, Jenny. I can't believe I had to follow Jenny. Oh my gosh, I drew the short straw. But I also just wanted to thank Brian Chang, the federal NDP candidate for Toronto Centre, for doing such amazing work, for always being such a strong, principled voice. And I'd like to thank the Stand With Asians Coalition for organizing tonight's important event. Thank you all for believing in hope and standing united against hate and forces that would seek to divide us. Our future is bright, and we will bring change because you are the change. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Terence. Thank you for bringing that into our attention. I just want to quickly talk about Peter Julian, our MP for New Westminster, Burnaby, and he has a motion that's going to be come up tomorrow in the order paper in the House of Commons. And the motion is basically exactly what we had been just talking about today about a systemic racism, how we need to address to that. It talks about working with provinces, territories, municipalities, and community-based organizations to put in place a reporting and tracking system. And we have to launch a robust public education campaign across Canada to talk about not just physical attacks, but we have to talk about actions, racist actions, gestures, verbal abuse, and we have to stand against all those behaviors, and also ensure that we have a comprehensive victim services that are available to all those people who've gone through, who are the victims of the hate crimes, and also work to eliminate all the hateful and harmful images and stereotypes that are present in the media and cinema. And also we need to talk about how we need to strengthen all the legislation around and against the hate and introduce amendments to the Canadian Human Rights Act to ensure that hate speech is no longer occurs with impunity. And lastly, to ensure that all federal government agencies and institutions consider the prevention of discrimination and the promotion of diversity as a guiding principles of their work. So that summarized Peter Julian's MP motion that will be tabled tomorrow in the House of Commons. And of course, like Terence is saying, if the Conservatives and even the Liberals maybe, and the Blocs block this motion, it will not be passed. That means we need all of you to talk to your MPs to support this motion. And I know that Peter Julian will be having a e-petition launch on his website, so make sure you go to check this out. Now that brings to the end of our evening tonight. Again, on behalf of the Stand With Asians Coalition, I wanted to say thank you to all of you for joining us tonight. We have a lot of work to do. We've learned a lot today. We'll continue to be a resource and a community for members to come together as allies to fight for racial justice. And we'll continue to work to keep pressure on our elected officials, writing to the MPs, writing to the MPPs, writing to your MLAs, so that we will be able to demand this anti-racism and anti-discrimination work to continue. Well, this is just the start of the work, not the end. And thank you so much. I encourage you to go back to our Facebook page to continue to put comments and share your stories with us. And thank you so much for being here tonight with us. I think Tim is going to share some music with us as the ending.